Do you ever get it when you're listening to the birds and they mean so much more to you? They speak to you. They can actually give you advice, or your mind can interpret the song of birds as advice. Now, this is a very, very curious thing because it's happened lots of times in my life when I was about to do something and the birds were bringing a level of awareness to me and advising me that maybe I shouldn't do that. And of course, the uninitiated in these realms would think that's insane. And for those who say that Gaia speaks to them, God speaks to them, why don't we just say that? You see, because look, I'm thinking the easiest thing to accept for most people is that some people think God speaks to them, or Jesus speaks to them, or Allah speaks to them, or whatever it is. And then people can kind of have a level of acceptance for that, and they won't say, oh, they're crazy. They'll just go, well, this religious realm, is bizarre, and lots of people do seem to have spirits speaking to them. So, all right then. But if you say the birds speak to you, or trees speak to you, then I spoke too many drugs. But it's different states of consciousness, people. That's what it's about. Some people have telepathy. Some people have the deepest levels of intuition. Some people are vastly more perceptive than others. And it's just different levels of consciousness. So this leads me on now to what I want to say in relation to whenever I'm saying something. If you people are not versed pretty deeply in the spiritual realm, in the entheogenic realm, if you haven't taken a good number of psychedelics, if you haven't studied your own psychology, if you aren't very versed in meditation, if you haven't studied science, in particular quantum physics, if you are not versed in those things, then where are you speaking from? You're not speaking from the scientific realm, you're not speaking from the religious realm, you're not speaking from the spiritual realm, you're not speaking from the psychological realm, you're not speaking from the philosophical realm. Well, where are you speaking from then? Oh, I'm just speaking from me, Aaron, Well, where is that? Do you know where that is? That's the narrowest parameter of human consciousness. That's the egoic realm of consciousness, where the ego thinks it knows something. The ego hasn't studied anything, has it? Because if it had studied something, then it would be a philosopher or a psychoanalyst or a scientist or a religious scholar or a spiritualist or something like this. And so if you aren't any of those, how can you expect to have a conversation with someone like me, who's versed in all those things? I've been investigating all those things for all my adult life in some shape or form, but exceedingly concentrated in this last 17 years. And so when people start writing things down, and there's lots of people over the years that oh, you think you're so great, you think you know this. Well, there's a flaw in what you're saying, and this isn't right, and I don't believe this, and this, that, and the other. And then they say something, and then I'll read it, and I'll go, well, you are evidently speaking from the lowest denomination. And, it's difficult to say in all due respect, or I'm not being disrespectful, but I mean, how else would you do it if you are saying to someone who wants to engage with you and thinks they know something, a bit like the Dunning-Kruger thing, that this is a fact. You say there's no facts, Aaron. I'm sitting in this deck chair. It's a fact. And then you say to them, what's a deck chair? And then they go on to describe it a little bit. And then you say, what's a chair? Oh, something you sit on. And I go, what? Is it a log? Well, no, it's the chair. Well, what is a chair then? You know, and then we start to go round and round in circles. And ultimately what I'm asking is, all you're speaking in is concepts, isn't it? That you've not really thought about. And so this is, where I am. If you want to tell me this is the fact and I'm sitting in a chair, then I'm just going to say to you straight off the bat, well, what's the chair? And then you're going to be umming and ahhing about what the chair is. And by the time we've got down to, well, the chair is molecules, and then it's atoms, and then it's fluctuating energy, and then ultimately we'll have, well, chair's just an idea. And I'll say, well, you're sitting in an idea then, aren't you? What's sitting? Well, it's a certain posture like this and blah, blah, blah. Well, again, you've got another idea, haven't you? And then you can say to me, oh, yeah. If you want to go like that, okay, forget it. Look, what I'm saying is, people, for those of you that, this is why people don't engage with me, but if you ever did want to engage with me, then the thing is to do is for you to assess your knowledge, what you really think you know. And you need to have a premise of why you think that. How many books are in your book collection? How many thousands of hours have you listened to a certain subject? And then you can say to me, I want to discuss religion with you, Aaron, because I've got, I've had a few experiences and, I've read all this and that and the other, and I'm familiar with many religions and, it's a minefield. And I'll go, great, okay, well, I'll engage with you on that level. And then we speak entirely within that level. We don't go out of any parameter unless we say, well, we enter into psychological realms when you start to have these supernatural experiences. So, if you're talking about religion and then you're talking about supernatural paranormal experiences, then you end up in psychology, don't you? And if you're going to be speaking about psychology and you exhaust that, then you probably extend it to philosophy. And then you talk about the philosophical nature of the supernatural and this, that and the other. So you have to be very, very ready to be engaging in all these subjects, because otherwise you just can't do it to any level of satisfaction. And so when people who are not versed in any of these things, they start talking from the ego, I go, point a few things out, and invariably it just goes pear-shaped. People get angry because they can't meet me where I'm coming from. Now, if anybody wants to argue that there's physical matter in the universe, then I would say, well, you evidently are a physicalist, right? A positivist, right? And if you don't know what those varieties of philosophy are, then you shouldn't be speaking to me. But if you do know what they are, then you go, well, yes, I'm a physicalist because I believe in the physical world. And then I'll say to you, well, have you heard about Buddhism? They reckon it's all Maya. Do you know why they reckon that? Well, it's very deep, but, how long have you got? Do you want to discuss that? And then I would say, well, what about quantum physics? They've reckoned that there's no physical matter for about 120 years. Do you know anything about that? Do you want to argue about that? So if you are stuck fast in your physicalism, in your positivism, well, those philosophies, they came and went in a span of about 10 or 15 years, and they're not respected these days because the world in general has got more sophisticated. And so people go, well, yeah, I mean, there appears to be a physical world, and the ego accepts as a physical world, and for all intents and purposes, as this human being experience, whatever it is, spirit, metaphysical, not physical, all these things, who knows, but let's just accept that the human being is physical, the world's physical, and then we can say, oh, I'm sitting in a deck chair, and oh yeah, we all, have an idea what the deck chair is. But what I'm saying is that then you are prepared to stop on the very, very first rung of the ladder of your inquiry into knowledge. Because you just accept concepts, you just accept ideas, and you just accept, well, everybody knows what a deck chair is, Aaron. But the question I asked, what do you really know what a deck chair is? That's what I'm asking. Why don't you break down the components of it, break down the reality of it, like René Descartes would have done, or many philosophers of the past. They've all done this. And so, I'm always saying to you people, look, you have to try to think where I'm coming from. And if you are not versed in those things I've mentioned, then you don't know where I'm coming from. You just think I'm speaking gibberish. And then that's why some of you will say, oh yeah, I believe, some of the things you say, oh, I'm with you on some of the things. Well, what things aren't you with me on? You should be discussing those things, and you can say, yeah, okay, look, I'm with you, Aaron, about, the human being, the pink ape's a fucking muppet, they're stupid, and they're very low IQ, and blah, blah, blah. But then, sometimes you say that, it's all Maya. Oh, well, I've got to get my head around that one. And then, we'll start talking about, well, other facets of knowledge which have investigated the all Maya thing. And then when you have a decent insight to those, you can start to go, okay, yeah, I'm grasping that now intellectually, but I don't know it experientially. I have never experienced the nothingness, because if you had experienced the nothingness, then you wouldn't have a problem at all with it all being Maya. And if you've been in very, very peculiar states of consciousness, with entheogens or without, then you would have seen life in a myriad of different varieties of consciousness. And you'd be going, well, I couldn't really discern which one was the real one, to be fair. Oh, this one seems so real. But if I went into a deep meditation, this one would just completely go away. And so what's real about that? And then if I took some entheogens, then another reality would come about. And then if I was terrified, something happens in the brain, people, and then the world looks very, very different. And then if you was absolutely ecstatic, the world is very different again. It's all these different states of consciousness. So it's only the state of consciousness which gives rise to anything that we would ever consider to have a reality. And so, this is where I'm at, and this is why I'm always saying to you people that, yeah, I get it why you don't come forward for a chat, because you're limited, and it takes an enormous amount of time and investigation and life experience to be where I am. With all the things I've encountered in my life, and the way my mind has always scrutinized things and inquired into things and broken down things into the nothingness. I take everything down into the nothingness. I dismantle absolutely everything down into the abyss. And then I bring it back incrementally. That's what I do. The great René Descartes, he's famous for sitting down in front of his fire one night and doing this. I've been doing it all my fucking life. And it's just the way some people's minds work, a philosophical mind. Some people have a scientific mind that will do all that sort of stuff. Richard Feynman is a classic example of that. He was always thinking in peculiar ways. This is why he won the Nobel Prize, because even in his fraternity of scientists, he was unusual and thought in unusual ways. And so, when I'm speaking, I'm using all of these tools. I'm utilizing everything I've ever learned, and I'm just in free flow. And so I will slip into philosophy, and then into psychology, and then into the paranormal, and then into the physical, egoic realm, and I will be all over the place. Unless somebody says to me, I want to speak with you about a certain subject, I will say to them, from what premise do you want to meet me at? Because in the past I've had friends and we go out, talking for hours and hours and hours, and then they'd ask me, what do you think about this? Something, on a video or something that's happening. And I would always have to say, well, where do you want me to speak from? And initially they wouldn't know what I meant. And I say, well, look, if you're going to ask me what do I think about the latest announcement of our government, well, let's speak about it. I'm assuming you want to speak about it at the egoic level. And, oh yeah, they're doing this and they're doing that and they're a bunch of lying fuckers and they're trying to control us, and yeah. And then we look into the root of, well, why is that happening? You see, me and my mates, there's been very, very few, to be honest, who can engage in this sort of stuff. We've watched hundreds and hundreds of videos on any given subject. And for instance, if we wanted to know what the deal is with the Illuminati, or with the Zionists, or with the hidden hand, with the lizards, and all these different sorts of things, we have to go down those rabbit holes, and we have to go down them long and deep. And when we do that, then we come back with certain information. And so, what some of us are starting to realise now, some of you are starting to realise, I've known it, 15 years, but in relation to the global leaders, some of you may be aware that the vast majority of the global leaders are paedophiles, sexual perverts. At the very, very least, they've been compromised sexually. And they have been compromised sexually from a very young age, often in these public schools, which means private, or Catholic boarding schools, where the very rich and privileged, they go to these schools. Their parents send them to these boarding schools. And, of course, even today, but back in the day most certainly, the Catholic boarding schools, they'd all get bummed. And it was an inauguration thing. And if the priest didn't bum you, then the other boys would bum you, because they've all been bummed and they feel that there's a hierarchical system and they're going to bum you. And you're going to know your place. And that's just how it is in these fraternities. And so this is why these leaders are cherry-picked and they're farmed and they're herded. And it was always going to be the case that they were going to be, they have been conditioned to be absolutely subservient to their masters, who hold this thing over them. And if ever they don't do what they're told to say, then the pictures come out and the scandal comes about and then the suicides come about. And so this is one of the things that we could call a fact. And anyone that's investigated this stuff know it absolutely to be true. And so that's just one instant. And so when we look at the politicians, and the politicians on one day will say one thing to you, the next day they'll say completely the opposite without being remotely embarrassed, and people will call for their resignation, and they ain't resigning nowhere. Why? Because they're put in these positions by the global leaders, and the global leaders just tell them to just sit where the fuck you are. And that's why no one resigns anymore, people. Back in the day, let's say 20, 30, 40 years ago, politicians would be resigning all the time when they've been compromised with prostitutes, male and female, or they've been caught in some variety of, sadomasochism, fucking business, all this stuff. And so that they would resign, but they don't resign anymore. It just doesn't matter. You've got all this stuff going on. It's all par for the course. And so with every last detail of every given subject, there is an avenue to go down, a rabbit hole to go down into a realm which is vast. And you can stay down these realms forever and a day. But if you want to have a decent overall, then you've at least got to stay down these rabbit holes for several months. And you've got to be listening to videos, one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. And then you start to gather a general consensus and an insight into all this stuff. And then you need to read the literature, of course, which was written, hundreds of years ago. And then you can see that they were saying it then. It's not just a new conspiracy. They've been saying it for millennia. And then you bring it forward and you go, okay, I'm building a profile now. And so this is what I've done, people. And so if any of you ever want to talk to me about something, then try to narrow the subject down and try to have an idea of where you want to come from. And if you are philosophically endowed, then you can say, I'd like to have a philosophical debate or discussion, or just a chinwag, really, because it's interesting, because that's what philosophers like to do. We like to engage like that. Then you could say, well, I've been depressed all my life, I've been anxious, and, I've wanted to kill myself, and this, that, and the other. Then I've had a spiritual awakening, and all these wonderful things have happened. I'd like to speak with somebody who knows something about that, and I think you do, Aaron, so you up for that? And of course I'm up for it. I wrote a whole fucking book about it. And so this is where we are, people. So, and of course I've said things like this for the past 17 years. And it's all in one ear and out the other. Why is it in one ear and out the other? Because if you did not have these 5 arrows to your quiver, then it wouldn't mean anything to you. Because the only fucking arrow you've got is the fucking, the egoic one. And you just think like, oh, I don't believe that. Oh, that sounds like a load of bollocks. All right, so philosophy, psychology. Yeah, well, I mean, I know what them words mean. And that's it. Have you studied them in depth for many, many, many years? If you've not, shut up. Shut up. So I was listening to a great conversation last night between Tucker Carlson and Sam Altman. And Sam Altman, for those of you that don't know, is the CEO of ChatGPT. And Tucker Carlson was really grilling him. And even when Tucker Carlson was just asking some basic rudimentary questions that he should be able to ask, and he most certainly should be making the public aware of, because this ChatGPT potentially is very, very powerful and unruly and disturbing. And so Tucker Carlson was just saying things like, okay, so what is ChatGPT's policy on suicide? And Altman's like, and Tucker's like, what do you mean, well? Surely you've worked that out. You've written something into ChatGPT, because if people, young, vulnerable, suicidal people, that they come onto ChatGPT and they start talking about this, and ChatGPT is okay with that, then what are you doing? Are you vouchsafing that people all over the world should be doing that, or at liberty to do that? Or are you going to write within the programs some sort of deterrent? But it's very difficult, because then you've got certain countries in the world. You've got states in America, you've got like Canada, Australia, you've got these countries which it is legal to do the euthanasia thing. You can request to be euthanized, and so therefore the state in these countries has accepted that you have the right to take your life, and the state have accepted that they will help you to do that. So effectively they are taking your life. They are administering something which diminishes your life. So in some parlance they could be called murderers. They could be called cullers. They could be called any number of things on the moral level. And so this is what Tucker Carlson was saying, that you should be having all these answers down, and you should be writing all this stuff. And Altman goes, well, yeah, but the information is vast. We do try to tackle this, that, and the other, but the algorithm's growing, immensely by the day, and we've got a big team that's keeping an eye on it and posing these questions and that. And then of course we're dealing with laws around the different parts of the world and different cultures. Wow, it's really, really complex, people. And so Tucker Carlson's kind of like, so what guidance do you have? What authority are you working under when you and your team are writing what is going to be considered by millions of people to be gospel? Because Tucker Carlson says you actually have created a religion now. And ChatGPT by lots of people is considered to be an entity, real, and they're getting real advice from a conscious entity. And lots of people proclaim that these large language modules have a level of consciousness already. In view of the fact we don't know what consciousness is, how could we say that it doesn't? And so when does a massive amount of data, reach a singularity? Nobody knows the answers to these questions, people. So Tucker Carlson is saying, do you believe in God? And Altman's like, I grew up in a Christian nation. And Tucker's like, I'm asking you a direct question. Do you believe in God? Do you believe that there's a creator, almighty, and he's got jurisdiction over everything? Well, there's certain, and he's like this. He doesn't want to say no, and he doesn't want to, most certainly doesn't want to say yes, because he doesn't believe that. He's an AI guy, he's a tech guy. But then when he's, speaking, being grilled before millions, it's kind of like, Tucker Carlson asks, where is your authority coming from? Are you working under the premise of God? Because if you are, then you have to work under the premise of what is written in the Bible in relation to morals and, responsibility and all the rest of those things that we have to take into consideration. And so that would be vastly too restrictive, and it couldn't encompass the whole world because you've got 4,000 other religions. So it would be absolutely biased if Sam Altman says, yes, I'm a Christian and we are instilling Christian values. Well, that's useless then, isn't it, for the atheists and for 4,200 other religions. And so, people, we're in very, very difficult times, and things aren't easy. So before you think you know something, I'm always asking you, on what grounds, under what premise do you think you know something? Now, if someone says, oh, I'm very versed in psychology, and I'd say, okay, well, how do you want to substantiate that? And then you say, well, I went to university to study psychology, and albeit I didn't get a degree, I dropped out in the latter part of the second year. So, I did 2 years, and, I learned a lot of stuff, and, my mind, has a propensity to think psychologically, analytically, this, that, and the other. So I think I could hold a good conversation. And I've read, probably about 100 books on the subject. Okay, right then. That sounds good. Sounds like we'll have a good chat. You see, so we need to have grounds, don't we? We need to have premises. And those of you that just think you know something and you don't have the grounds and premise because you haven't been prolific readers, you haven't really studied, and you're not really good critical thinkers, because you can watch YouTube for years and years and years. And I've got people watching me now. And I've spoke to them and I said to them, well, so why is it that you watch my videos? And you know what they say? Well, I must get something from them, but can't nail it down. You can't nail it down? You haven't thought about it then, have you? You see, because if people are just listening and listening and listening, and they're not absorbing things, they're not storing this information, they're not questioning, and they're not making comparisons, then they'll never be able to just go, I watch your videos because they're a great source of fucking out there outlandish knowledge, and I learn a lot about you, and you seem pretty versed in lots of stuff, and you reference lots of stuff, and you read all the books, and I've checked some of your stuff, what you've said, and it rings true as far as what I've learned as well. And so I'd like to have a conversation with you on that front. And so something like that, we need to do something like that, people. So this is why invariably you don't get channels talking to nobodies, so-called nobodies, when you've got these channels out there, and they're always speaking to big people, aren't they? They're speaking to doctors and PhDs and this, that and the other, because they can ask them questions about specific subjects and they know things about it. Whereas if you listen to conversations I have with some of you, the viewer, then none of us have PhDs, none of us even have degrees to my knowledge. We've gathered our information through a whole myriad of portals, and nobody has peer reviewed us, and it's kind of like we're on the fly. We are recalling things we've read or we've listened or we've experienced, and we're bringing all these things together like that. And they're the sort of conversations that I personally like, because what I've discerned over the years, people, is when I listen to the PhDs, I never, ever, ever hear any of them saying, well, my personal experience is this and that, because nobody wants to listen to their personal experience. They want peer-reviewed knowledge, something that they can reference. Oh, he says this. Oh, where can I find that? Where's that reference? Oh, in my book, in the bibliography, you will find it, blah, blah, blah. They like to do that, these clinical anal people that can't think for themselves. But a person that thinks for themselves would like to hear about someone's personal experience. Yes, I mean, I had this personal experience. This is why I could say that, this notion of God is not too outlandish, because I've been spoken to by voices, entities, very, very real. And when you read stuff in the Bible and spiritual books, well, you can hear it said there the same. And so it's happened to lots of people. And then you can go online and you can read near-death experiences where people have met Jesus and God and the Virgin Mary and all this little sorts of stuff. And so it's kind of like it's not such an outlandish realm. And so people who don't have PhDs and credibility have the freedom to be able to say these things, whereby a PhD would never have the freedom to speak about their personal experience of meeting the devil one night. It would be so-and-so, PhD scientist meets the devil one night. And then all of a sudden, all of his peers would fucking stop answering his phone calls. That's how it is, people. So, if you want really to get into information and experience and knowledge and all that different sorts of complex stuff, you have to speak with people like me who have done the research but also have had the experience, and then on top of that there's a brain inside and a level of cognition which puts all the pieces meticulously together. And if you can write a book about it which states it plainly, then that may be fucking useful for some people. And so, on that note, have a great day.